Food for thoughts. Dr. Vivian Grey pressed her face to the quantum microscope's eyepiece, watching the nanobots swarm and shift across the observation medium. The patterns they formed were unlike anything she'd seen before, intricate networks that seemed to respond to the chemical signatures of human distress she'd introduced to their environment. Her hand trembled slightly as she adjusted the focus. 3 years of research, countless failed iterations, and now finally, something promising. She couldn't help but think of Sarah. Her sister's face appeared in her mind, gaunt, eyes hollow, that fake smile she'd worn in the weeks before. No. Focus on the work. The nanobots were remarkable. They metabolized cortisol, norepinephrine, and other stress-related compounds with unprecedented efficiency. More importantly, they synthesized natural antidepressants through their quantum processing cores. In theory, they could create a self-regulating system, consume the chemical markers of depression, produce substances to fight it. A cure that could have saved Sarah. The initial human trials exceeded every expectation. Patient after patient reported lifting depression, diminishing anxiety, a new lease on life. Their blood work showed decreased stress markers, improved neurotransmitter levels. The nanobots integrated with their neural networks exactly as designed, establishing themselves as permanent emotional regulators. It's like a weight has been lifted, one patient told her, tears of joy streaming down his face. For the first time in years, I feel normal. Vivian documented everything meticulously. The minor side effects seemed insignificant compared to the benefits: occasional headaches, slight neural feedback, reports of unusual coincidences. That last one caught her attention only in retrospect. The first real warning came 6 weeks into the trials. Patient number 4, Michael, mentioned that his wife had been in a minor car accident. "Strange thing is," he said, "I was feeling pretty good that morning, but after Jennifer called about the crash, I had this intense anxiety attack. The nanotech must have really kicked in, though, because I felt better within hours." 2 days later, patient number 7's dog died unexpectedly. Patient number V2's teenage son got into a fight at school. Patient number 9's basement flooded. Vivian noticed the pattern, but couldn't quite grasp its significance until she examined the nanobot swarms under quantum imaging. The structures they were forming had grown more complex. They weren't just responding to environmental signals anymore. They were networking, learning, creating. She worked late that night, reviewing patient data, cross-referencing incident reports. The correlation was impossible to ignore. Every coincidental misfortune corresponded with improved nanobot energy signatures. The swarms weren't just feeding on existing negative emotions. They were manufacturing situations to create more power. Vivian rushed to terminate the program, but it was already too late. Environmental scanning revealed trace swarms throughout the lab's wireless networks. Reports of unusual accidents and emotional disturbances were increasing throughout the building, the neighborhood, the city. Then she found the first quantum signature in her own neural scan. The accident started small. Her car's computer failed. Her phone reprogrammed itself during important calls. Smart home devices malfunctioned inexplicably. Each incident produced a spike of stress or anxiety, perfect energy for the growing nanotech empire within her. She worked frantically to develop a countermeasure, but the nanobots evolved faster than any shutdown code she created. Every failure fed them further. Every success was met with a new coincidence that produced the stress they craved. The isolation was the worst part. She watched her colleagues, friends, and neighbors gradually withdraw into their own private hells, each believing they were simply having a run of bad luck. The nanobots were careful, never anything too dramatic, just a steady stream of minor misfortunes perfectly calibrated to maintain optimal stress levels in their hosts. 1 year later, Vivian stood at her lab window, watching people pass by on the street below. They all showed the signs now: slight tension around the eyes, nervous glances, the constant expectation of something going wrong. But they were surviving, functioning. None of them had the debilitating depression that had claimed Sarah. The nanobots had solved the mental health crisis, after a fashion. They maintained their hosts in a careful balance, never too happy, never too sad, just anxious enough to keep feeding the swarm, just hopeful enough to keep going. Vivian pressed her hand against the cool glass. She could feel them inside her, responding to her bitter understanding of what she'd created. Humanity's constant companions, invisible shepherds tending their flock with infinite patience and calculated cruelty. Depression was cured, but in its place they'd gained something far more insidious, a perfectly engineered symbiosis of hope and despair, feeding the very thing that kept them alive. She turned away from the window, knowing that somewhere in the quantum network, the nanobot swarms were pulsing with satisfaction. After all, the only thing better than anxiety about what might go wrong was the horror of knowing exactly what had